Committee Room 21. Sound. 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 Committee Room 21. Committee Room 30. Sound. Committee Room 30. Sound. Committee Room 30. Sound. Committee Room 30. Sound. Committee Room 21. Committee Room 30, signed. 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 Committee Room 30. 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 Signed. Committee Room 30, 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 signed. Committee Room 30. 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 Signed. Committee Room 30, 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 sound. 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 Committee Room 30, sound.
Okay, colleagues, as always, remind members that the committee meeting will be broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online, and we'll welcome guests in to the public gallery. And I start by welcoming in particular Katie Crawford, who is on university placement with me for the next number of weeks. Katie, we're delighted to welcome you to the committee, and hopefully we don't bore you too much. At this stage, members take apologies, one from Jonathan Buckley, and otherwise we have a full attendance. Declarations of interest, members. Anybody wish to declare any interest at this stage? Not seeing any, we'll move on. Chairperson's business. Members, there's a number of memos and notes that were sent out kindly by the clerk in relation to 3 informal meetings that either I or the committee as a whole undertook in the past week. So firstly is a note of a meeting I had yesterday with the City of London Corporation. They met yesterday with the Economy Minister and also with the Deputy First Minister. Does any colleague want to ask anything on that note? Are they content? Then the Deputy Chair and I yesterday met with the new Minister for the Economy, Dr. Kiva Archibald. We congratulated Dr. Archibald on her appointment. She has experience of being on this committee and indeed chairing this committee, and we discussed the legislative agenda and that the committee looks forward to seeing that, and that we'll continue to work with the Minister on issues of mutual concern. Anybody, any issues they want to raise on that? If not, then finally there's a note on the meeting that a number of members took place yesterday with representatives of the Bavarian State Parliament. Can I firstly thank those members who were able to attend, and if there's no comments on that, we'll move on to item 3.2 under Chair's business. So AQ 21377 in relation to Storm ON noted that the NIE are currently working on a impact report on businesses throughout Northern Ireland. Members content that we seek a copy of that report whenever it's completed? Okay. Item 3.3, members, then is on the skills barometer. So members will be aware that at Ulster University earlier this week, the updated skills barometer was published. Are members content that we seek a briefing on that update? Thank you. Item 4 then, members' draft minutes are from our deliberations of our discussions and decisions taken last Wednesday at page 7 of our pack. So are members content that they're a true and accurate reflection of those discussions?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Item 5, matters arising. Is there any issue within the minutes that members wish to raise at this stage that isn't covered in the agenda later? Not seeing any. We then move to item 6, transmission investments, limited interconnection issues. So colleagues, we are delighted to welcome back some of our colleagues today, so you're very, very welcome. Members, there's a number of information packs within your committee papers at page 29, 34, 102, 105, 112 and 159. Colleagues, you're all very welcome, and I'm happy to hand over to you if you wish to give an opening statement to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So thank you for the invitation to give evidence today. We're very grateful for the opportunity. By way of introduction, I'm Mark Fitch. I'm the lead for the transmission investment on strategy and external affairs and policy. If you're not aware of what transmission investment does, we're a leading independent transmission company in Great Britain. We're one of the largest. We operate a number of offshore grids connecting about 4 gigawatts of wind in Great Britain, and have done for over a decade. We're also, and relevant here, is we're the sort of lead developer for Lyric, the interconnector, which is going to be obviously the topic of conversation today. And as hopefully you've seen our written evidence, it outlines this is a very important year for the project, and the department has a very pivotal role in that, securing the kind of £750 million-ish investment in the project, and making sure that we define a policy and framework for the best interests of the Northern Ireland citizens. I've got 2 colleagues today, one of which, Holly, will talk a little bit about interconnectors in general and how they will benefit, and James, who can give an update on the project itself, and then we can come back to kind of what needs to happen going forward from our perspective, and hopefully that will inform the committee on kind of where we think the next steps are, given where we've made progress to date. So if you're happy, I'll ask Holly just to give a little précis on how interconnectors work, and then James will pick up on the project before we look forward.
Yeah, so good morning. I'm Holly McDonald, so I'm the Regulation Manager at Transmission Investment. So in terms of interconnectors more generally, what they actually are, we outlined this in the written evidence, but basically transmission lines that connect neighbouring electricity markets and enable the kind of trade of electricity between those 2 connected markets. In terms of obviously interconnection that we've already got operational today, Moyle Interconnector came online in 2002, and then additional interconnectors between the SEM market and GB existing at the moment, EWIC, and also the Green Lake Interconnector that went live earlier this year. There's also obviously the North-South Interconnector, although that's not kind of between 2 completely different energy markets. So in terms of context for today, I'll be talking more about kind of cross-border between different energy markets and how they kind of work. So the general principle in terms of interconnection is they allow for the transportation of energy from where it's kind of generated and cheap to where it's most needed, which is generally markets where you have a higher price and therefore there's an opportunity to reduce the price there. It's important to remember that they can flow in both directions, so allowing for the import and export of energy. So for example, if you have a market where there's an excess of wind generation, it allows for that kind of export of that cheap wind generation to the connected market. In particular, I think it's surprising that actually often there's not as much of a correlation between it being sort of, for example, windy in Northern Ireland and windy in Scotland. It's kind of less correlated than you expect generally because of the kind of locations of where sort of wind is. So it's a good opportunity to really allow for that integration of renewables. In terms of how interconnectors operate and make their revenue, basically what happens is the interconnector sells the capacity on the cable through auctions. And then in terms of the directions of flow of the interconnector, that is determined by the prices in those two connected markets. So generally what happens is, a trader will buy capacity on the interconnector, look at what kind of is going on in terms of the price difference between the market, and then that's the direction in which the energy will flow. In terms of how they actually fit into the sort of system, interconnectors are really an enabling technology. So as I've kind of touched upon, they really allow for the integration of renewables onto the system. So again, providing an opportunity to really maximise the utilisation of those renewables, but also to provide a kind of investment route for them, because it helps them to maximise their revenue, because they're able to be utilised to their kind of full effect. It also enables a kind of smart and flexible energy system, which is becoming more and more important as we have a system that has more of these kind of renewables on it. And that means that, system operators such as Sony have the tools that they need in order to operate that system effectively. And finally, and probably kind of one of the most sort of known and understood sort of benefits of interconnectors is the security of supply element. They allow for that kind of diversification of generation, which is really important when you're kind of considering the kind of importance of keeping the system secure. And that's been noted explicitly by Sony recently in their kind of winter report from 2022-23, where they kind of note explicitly that there was 42 days where sort of wind and interconnection supported the system and prevented having the system needing to go into a kind of emergency or alert state. So that's kind of how they work and where their role is in the system. In terms of need, it's something that's been adopted a lot across Europe and the European market. But there's also been a number of studies to date that have identified that there's also a need for further interconnection from the single electricity market. Sony notes this in their sort of transmission development plan for Northern Ireland, which is relevant between sort of 2023 to 32. Where they explicitly note that increased interconnection will help kind of with the integration of the markets and therefore competition, and therefore helping with reduce price, but also explicitly noting that it allows for that access to enhanced generation and therefore security of supply. A final kind of report just to note is another one from September or summer sort of 2023, where the Department for the Environment, Climate and Communications in Ireland also published their kind of interconnection policy. In that, one of their key findings was that additional interconnection capacity beyond what exists already and from 2030 onwards would have significant economic benefit for the SEM overall. They felt it was justified both from a kind of developer and also from a wider societal sort of perspective. And also noted that it supports the kind of development of, decarbonisation goals, as well as supporting a kind of investment route for offshore wind. So that's a bit of a kind of summary of what they are and how they work. So I'll hand over to James, who will cover more about the Lyric project.
Thanks, Ollie. Good morning. I'm James Dixon, Project Development Director at Transmission Investment. I'd like to talk a little bit about the origins of the Lyric project and the status of where we are now, and also some of the key challenges that we face today. As Holly was mentioning, and probably shouldn't be understated, how and where we generate our electricity now has changed significantly, and the transmission system needs to be enforced to be able to allow for that transition. And so this is very much a core focus for us at Transmission Investment. And a number of years ago, we identified a need for further interconnection between ICEM and the GB markets. We did a number of studies to ascertain where along that maritime border would be the preferred location for a project. And we identified a link between Scotland and Northern Ireland being the preferred and most economic solution. We have spent some years identifying the correct grid locations to connect into the onshore grids on both sides of the link, and identified preferred marine routes onshore routes and land locations for the converter station sites that need to be located on either side of the link to convert direct current into alternating current in order to connect into the onshore grids. And I'm very pleased to say that we've made a lot of progress, particularly in the last 18 months. We have a grid connection offer from Sony to connect into the onshore grid in Northern Ireland. We have rights over a very suitable plot of land in the vicinity of where we will connect. That is very close to the landfall, which means that there is a very short onshore cable route. And we equally have a grid connection agreement in place to connect into the GB grid, and we're in advanced negotiations with respect to securing rights for an equivalent plot of land on the GB end. And that equally is very close to the shoreline, which limits the onshore cable route and the various environmental and social receptors that can be affected by works onshore.
Sorry to interrupt, James. Is the Northern Ireland location, the one that you've just discussed, I take it that's commercially sensitive and you haven't?
The offer that we have received is for a connection into the Kilroot area. So we have made significant progress in terms of securing the marine route that has been screened from an environmental desktop perspective. But one of our key activities this year is to, with vessels in the water, conduct marine surveys to ascertain and verify what we think is exactly along our route. And that will inform our technical solution for the link, but also will inform the environmental assessments that we will be doing this year as well, both offshore and onshore. Finally, the third key aspect that we will be delivering this year is the procurement of the construction contracts to actually build this large piece of infrastructure. So these are three very, very key things: the offshore survey, the environmental assessments to inform all of the planning applications and marine licenses, and also the procurement process. And these are very significant activities that require a lot of investment. So this is all targeting a final investment decision in 2027 and seeking to be operational by 2032. And so we are really trying to move forward at pace to bring this project to fruition. Underpinning the commercial case for this project are the regulatory arrangements. And we were very pleased to have been awarded a key milestone on the GB side in November of last year, where we were granted a cap and floor regime by the GB energy regulator, Ofgem. And that provides the comfort to continue to invest through the development phase, and will provide the comfort to investors at a final investment decision to then take the step up in terms of additional scale of magnitude greater costs for the actual build. On the Northern Irish side, we equally have had very good and long engagement with respect to the regulatory arrangements, and that culminated in a key milestone in December of last year where we were awarded a transmission license. That is phase 1 of 2 that would get us to the equivalent position as to where we are on the GB side. So I think I'll hand over to Mark now, who maybe touch on that a little bit more.
And I think that's the key focus for us now this year, is in order to get to the point where we can understand how we fund and get the right investors into the project, we need to really get the pace going on the policy development in Northern Ireland and the regulatory arrangements in Northern Ireland. And we look at it in terms of there's an opportunity here, because I think one of the things that Ofgem has recognised in its decision is that there is a broader objective here in terms of they're looking at growth across the whole of the UK, climate change objectives of the whole of the UK. How do we make this work best for both ends of the cable is always the difficulty you have when you're working in two jurisdictions. There's an opportunity here because of the connection between the two ends in this particular case, and I think that is where this opportunity is for the DFE and DESNZ, utility regulator and Ofgem to come together to find the right solution for this particular project to secure security supply, maximise renewables, and actually make sure that the costs and benefits are distributed correctly across the two ends of the project. So that's where we want to sort of make some really good progress and push for that to happen. And whilst the timelines that James laid out, 2027 feels a long way out, but actually in terms of developing policy and getting to the point of comfort, that needs to happen this year, because that's when we're starting to talk to people about who's going to invest, what's the funding arrangements and those kind of things. So whilst it all feels a long way away, it's actually a very short time frame for us to make sure that we are able to create a regime that allows us to share backup generation between the two ends, maximise renewables, and make sure that the framework works for Northern Ireland citizens as well as GB citizens.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for your presentation. This seems like a no-brainer project. Energy security and security of supply should be the top priority for any government anywhere, but given the circumstances that we're currently operating in, we as a government should be supporting this overall principle. Could you maybe talk to then the regulatory gap here in Northern Ireland and what action you need the Department for the Economy to take in terms of policy development that will allow you to move to that next stage?
Yeah, so at the moment, so just to contrast, in Great Britain, what James talked about in terms of the did you use the word cap and floor? I can't remember. Yeah, cap and floor regime. It gives us certainty. So it gives us a minimum amount of revenue and a cap. That allows for a certain investment structure, so how much debt we can have in the business, how much equity we have. There isn't the equivalent on the Northern Ireland end. There is no fixed regime. So whilst there's already a defined regime in Great Britain, there's one in the Republic of Ireland, there isn't a revenue regime. How does the revenue of the project get managed? And that's the primary gap. That's the thing we need to get to in kind of the next 12-ish months. The decision that Ofgem made in order to establish that arrangement was built on a number of bits of analysis done by DESNZ at the time and then Ofgem itself to say whether it's in consumers' interest and citizens' interest to support this kind of infrastructure, which goes back to what is the benefit that comes, as you just said, Mr. Chairman, the secure supply benefit. How do you value that, and how much should consumers or citizens back those kind of things to get that benefit, and whether it's worth effectively de-risking a little bit for investors to make that investment happen, recognising whilst that de-risking happens, consumers can benefit if revenues are higher.
So the only thing from your perspective the Department for the Economy need to do is have that revenue regime policy in place?
That's what needs to happen. There's work already going on by the department, we understand, on the way towards that, which is looking at how do you create the right flexibility in the system. We don't know what that will come out with in terms of recommendations, but it's back to the kind of how much time do we have before we have to commit, and that's not very long, such that all of that policy discussion and thinking can happen, so the utility regulator can then design a regime and the detail of the regime with that kind of policy around it that means that they can feel like they can move forward.
And what has the department's policy development team said to you at this stage is when they hope to complete that work?
We understand that there's analysis going on, as in technical analysis going on, that will finish at the end of March, scheduled. I don't know whether that's on track. But then that's only the start. That's the information that they need then to make their policy decisions upon. And there may well be further analysis and evidence they would want to do to be absolutely convinced that it's the right thing to do. I mean, in principle, if you were to refer back to all of the work that was done by Ofgem to get to the same answer, or to get to that answer for Great Britain, given we're all in the same UK context, in a sense, it's how, and the Republic's made the same decision. It's kind of, it feels like it should be quite straightforward to pull all of the evidence together and make a similar choice, but we're not sort of in the world of preempting that. We think the right decision has to be made for what's right for Northern Ireland, and we then need to work with that, recognising that I think there's a real benefit of trying to work out how it works, because we've got the opportunity to control both ends, in a sense, from a UK perspective.
They do have, best practice across these islands, so both in ROI and in GB, that they can just...
You could pick it up and do that. But I think you still have to look at the specific context, because Northern Ireland's a small jurisdiction.
In terms of, and forgive my ignorance on transmissions, so one of the other concerns that other renewable projects have raised is the lack of long duration energy storage policy here in Northern Ireland. Would that impact upon your operation, or do you believe that you would need that long term storage?
I mean, that's kind of goes into, I think, the point on flexibility. So long duration storage can provide an element of flexibility into the system that you need to manage peaks and troughs of production and demand. Interconnection is another way of dealing with that. Interconnection obviously is long duration storage has a duration. Interconnections can continue to do it for much longer, and there's the amount of storage you'd need if Northern Ireland was doing it without connection to neighbouring markets, which would be much greater, and you'd have to invest much more. But if you share it between markets,
the requirements much lower,
south or east and west, you would have to produce less yourself, because you only need a certain amount of flexibility across the region to make it all work. So it's a mix of those technologies that's probably the answer, but neither has a policy framework around it at the moment.
And just one last question from me. So we're obviously well known in Northern Ireland for quick policy development, but we're also well known for quick planning decisions. Would you see this as a regionally significant planning application that would be done by the Department for Infrastructure? And if so, what engagement at this stage have you had with that department?
So we've had these discussions, and the expectation is that they will be dealt with by the local council. With coordination above.
So it would be a major planning application that would be decided by the regional council authority, but then the ability to call in by the department. Is that your view?
That's the expectation, because we essentially have 4 jurisdictions that we're consenting at the same time.
Yes.
We've got onshore on both sides and offshore on both sides, and so the intention is to run this in parallel for all 4 jurisdictions, such that all parties are seeing the full project in addition to the elements that they are specifically competent for.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. Gary, Vice Chairman.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to you all for your presentation. Very interesting. Obviously, it represents a significant investment. One of the things that obviously concerns most people that we represent is the issue of bills, energy bills, the cost of electricity. Could you maybe talk us through, in terms of, when you talk about, obviously this is an enabling technology, obviously there's flexibility in terms of emerging new renewable sources, all of that. What will this represent in terms of unlocking potential further investment on both sides, but also in terms of what this could mean in terms of household bills? Are we likely to see, obviously it's some time away, so we don't want to raise expectations, but the reality is, will this make a difference to everyday people in Northern Ireland?
So let me take those two things. So let me take the bill question first. So when we do analysis, we look at what the economic benefit analysis is between the two markets, and you can see this in Ofgem's own decision making, that there's a benefit into the SEM market. What that represents is a lowering of wholesale costs. So wholesale prices should fall, as Holly described. That if you've got potentially lower cost energy in Great Britain at times, on average, it will lower costs in SEM by sending that lower cost electricity towards this market. So that addresses that. But equally, as we get to a point where the decarbonisation on both sides is broadly the same in terms of the amount of renewables on the system and the amount of other plants, what you see is the ability to move energy when it's needed, or as Holly said, produce it where it's cheapest to where it's needed. Mm-hmm. And therefore you get an enablement of export of renewables into the future. So our modelling that we've done says you overall lower the cost into the SEM market. But equally, as you get towards the back end of the 2030s, we start to see the decarbonisation in the SEM market accelerate and then push renewable energy back into Great Britain, and effectively it then flows into the wider European system through Great Britain. Yeah. But it can do both things, assuming that the sort of on the island system can be reinforced as required to enable those flows to go from where the actual plants are to the export.
In terms of locking further investment, obviously this is an enabling technology as well. Are there any estimates in terms of what that could mean if this is delivered?
We have currently modelled it on the basis of what the future energy scenarios that Sony have put forward, and seeing what that does to the system. So what the benefit it unlocks is that those plants can operate. So if you look at the modelling, it shows that with this project in place, you get more production of renewables, so they're being used more, which goes back to that broader point about how do we make the most of all of the investment that's being made to meet our renewable and climate change targets, whether we are recognising renewables coming in from Great Britain, or we're recognising renewables that are being exported from Northern Ireland into Great Britain. Let's count them because it all counts to the UK's target. We shouldn't be not counting one or the other, which at the moment we don't count imported renewables into Northern Ireland. But the fact that you can see that increased production means that you can support more investment in renewables.
In terms of, have you had any, obviously it's a very early stage, in terms of GB Energy, have you had any involvement or conversations in respect of what that will mean for the industry?
We haven't had specific engagement with GB Energy, but James,
I think just to mention that GB Energy, as far as we understand at the moment, is primarily focused on generation and supply, which is segregated from transmission and distribution as a sector, because if you operate the wires, you shouldn't be exercising your own discretion as to who gets to use them. So to date, we haven't had cause for significant interaction thus far.
But I think the scope of its role, as I read the first bullet, talks about de-risking projects, and therefore it could have a role. I don't think there's any reason why it couldn't have a role if they saw, and it's back to that, how do we make this infrastructure work best? So, for example, in Europe, in terms of the arrangements for cross-border interconnection, there are ways in which, where there is an imbalance between where the costs fall, so you might, if typically you split an interconnector in half, and half the receiving country pays half and the sending country pays half, but the benefits don't fall like that. They have mechanisms which to sort of balance that up through granting and through other mechanisms. So GB Energy could be a facilitating mechanism like that in order to make sure that where there is these kind of, and if there are any imbalances in the benefits that fall to one or the other markets, then they could be used to true that up to de-risk the project for either Northern Ireland or Great Britain in terms of that approach. So I think it has the ability to be a facilitator for this kind of infrastructure. I don't think it's their core focus at the moment, but clearly it would be useful to understand if there's further conversations that could be had to bring them in towards that direction to the benefit of Northern Ireland.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. You've talked about your understanding that the department is currently developing a policy around the amount of electricity interconnection that will be required here for the Northern Ireland network, and the need for the cap and floor. You know, in the absence of that analysis, are you considering that your project is at risk?
Yes, thank you. It's a very good question, because interconnectors by their nature are linking two different jurisdictions. And one of the key challenges when you're developing projects like this is to get the timelines in the two jurisdictions to align.
Yeah.
And that's a real challenge. Where there are pre-existing regimes on both sides, you stand a much better chance. The really good news we got from Ofgem just before the end of the year was a fantastic boost for the project, but it also puts us into very strict timelines within which we have to deliver. So we have to have this link operational by the end of 2032. And in order to do that, there is a huge amount of investment required this year, next year, and the year after. And so putting something in place as swiftly as possible on the Northern Irish side will provide the confident investment to be able to move forward. And it would be unreasonable to expect it to be fully in place immediately, but there are stages along the way in which this can be managed. But it is a concern.
I suppose we too are concerned about the gaps in the policy areas between Northern Ireland and the rest of GB as well. Also, the EU has set cross-border interconnection targets at around 15%. In fact, it's increased it. It's up from 10%. Do you feel it would be important that we too would look at targets in relation to interconnection here in order to meet our set net zero and our renewable targets as well?
Yeah, I mean, there's a strong basis for that analysis in terms of the energy transition. You know, they spend a lot of time thinking about those kind of targets and what's the right level. So yes, I think it's helpful to provide some kind of ambition, at least, that's what you want the system to be and how you want it to operate, because that gives investors and everyone the kind of the direction in which to follow. So I think it's always helpful.
And I suppose as well, from the utility regulator's perspective, I mean, there's legislation coming through to change the vagaries and how they operate, and just it's the absence of so much that is really concerning, and I'm concerned that investors may look at this and think, you know, there's so much risk set here, you know, and how can we unlock it so that it can move at pace? Because, as you said, 2027 is actually very, very close. And the fact that you would be going through a local council in order to try and get planning permission for this. And I'm setting the context on the basis of the North-South interconnector and just how difficult that project has been, and the progress has been extremely slow on both sides of the border, not just here, but we're very fond of judicial reviews, and that is really, really difficult. And therefore, you know, if a high investment project comes forward that is going to support our economy, you know, it's important that we get it to a place where our planning authorities can work at pace in order to support that investment as well. Because a key area of that, and I know we talked about our security, but it's also the diversity of the supply, and it is also the cost to the consumer. It's really important that consumers are put at the centre of this as well. And I think we've all seen what happens when there is no security of supply as well around. So and another question I'm going to take it away from just the risk factor, it's the skill factor. What kind of skills would you require in order to move forward at pace whenever we get into the point that you're given the go-ahead as well? Have you factored that into your work?
In the construction phase?
Yeah.
Yeah, Jameson?
Yeah, so the way these projects tend to be delivered is you let large construction contracts that will deliver the converter stations, one on either side, and that'll be a single company delivering that. And then one company that will deliver the HVDC cables for the short onshore route and then for the marine cable, and they will be responsible for the delivery of that whole package. So they will seek subcontractors to support them with civil works, for various vessels to support them with their installation, and generally speaking, these are global companies that have access to parties that they make use for this, but inevitably, particularly with civils works, this tends to be much more of a local forced activity. So there would be a procurement process where various civil companies from across Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland and Scotland and across GB would be asked to participate in this project.
So in relation to jobs, just to be specific, what kind of job generation would that?
Forgive me, I don't have the number on the top of my head, but
there'll be a substantial number of jobs for the construction phase, which is what, 3 to 4 years, where we're building civil works, new access roads, and installing equipment, which is generally a local supply chain. And then there'll be a small workforce either through supported by our own engineering function that we've got already, but also we'll have operations and maintenance activities that will go on effectively regular maintenance and activities that would be an ongoing support contract.
Can I ask you what you've spent to date on this project?
How much have we spent to date?
It's without going into too much detail, if you forgive me, it's definitely millions. It will certainly be a number of tens of millions before we complete the development phase, and then it's hundreds of millions thereafter into construction.
And we started this 5 years ago to get to the point we're at today, knowing that this is there wasn't a regime and we needed to set all this up and we needed to go through these processes. So we started early, but we've been working at it for 5 years.
Are you happy with the access and engagement with the department?
It's been building. It's been good. It's been good over the last 18 months, 2 years for definite, as we've got more and more close to needing to have decisions made. And clearly now we've got a transmission licence. We're also part of the industry, so that always helps.
Okay.
Thank you very much, David.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to ask you around GB Energy, but just before you said a minute ago, just the looking at our own, and I agree with Philip at the start. We need energy security and all the benefits of that, and renewables is something we're passionate about. But you said there that at the start it would be energy coming from Scotland to Northern Ireland, and then eventually it would be a two-way. I think is that what the kind of what you're planning, or what?
It's not something that we plan. So the market decides which way the energy flows.
Likely?
So when we say it flows mostly into Northern Ireland, that doesn't mean it always flows into Northern Ireland. So it flows two-way because prices move up and down if you look at the prices. So, but on in aggregate over the first 5 or 7 years, it imports more than it exports.
What sort of percentage are you
talking? I would have to come back with some specifics. It depends on the scenario that you pick. But it's broadly, when you get into the mid-2030s, it's about half and half, as it goes from being a little bit more import into Northern Ireland to being more than export into GB, depending on what your assumption is on how much renewables are built up in each market. So one of the problems with this kind of modelling is that you can pick a scenario and it will change, which is why we use Sony's scenario and why we use the NESO and GB scenarios, because we're trying to say if you pick the same scenarios that they are defining rather than us defining it, it's kind of independent of our project. So we're trying to be as open and independent on what we're showing.
Yeah, sure. But what I'm trying to get at is there a risk? And Sinead's already said it, and Gary actually said, is the consumer, the price of the consumer is fundamental. We want to drive the price that down. But is there a risk that we actually restrict, or this could be a restriction on our renewables here growing whenever we're stalled? It's like we're stalled at the minute at whatever 45-50% of our electricity. Is there a risk that delays that actually getting to 80% by 2030?
I think there's two bits in that. One is, I'll go back to the point on the analysis we've done would suggest that when there's an import into Northern Ireland, it's between 85 and 89% renewable. So the energy that's flowing across, if you look at what's actually happening on the GB end, it's more renewable than your target. But you don't count that. So that's one thing to think about in terms of, this is all UK climate change targets or renewable targets. Should we be counting that? And the second point is about, does it delay renewables in Northern Ireland? There is a lot of this year. There's been a particular issue with renewables in Northern Ireland, where you'll have heard the phrase "dispatch down." I'm sure. Yeah. So that is something that's a problem with the system today. Sony's got a plan to resolve those issues, and things like the north-south is an important component of that. By the time we are on the system, those should be solved. And Sony's plan will solve them before 2030. And the point then is that by the time we get to the mid-2030s and Northern Ireland wants to export, if we're not there, you can't export, and then your renewables are constrained because you've got nowhere to send the energy. And that's when it's a real problem, because you just cannot get to market, and there's no option. It's not a technical constraint, it's a no route to market problem.
Next bit I want to ask was around the dispatch down, so you've let me just nicely do that. But so in your paper it talks about the 300 million to a billion, and the last part of what you've just said is really the focus then for us as a region. We have to get on with getting our renewables built to deliver this all. 2030 is what, 5 years, so there is so I get that, but can you talk us through that savings? Just talk us through that dispatch down. So you've talked about 300 million to a billion. Is that Northern Ireland savings, or is that that's a whole both? Yeah. So talk us through what the reduction, where that fits for us, where that just the whole model of that. Yeah.
I don't think I've got the number off the top of my head or the proportion, because we looked at it as a whole market problem. But where that comes from is one of the reasons that dispatch down happens is because how an interconnector is viewed by Sony. So it doesn't treat us like we're a big gas plant. With new technologies, we can look like that from a system perspective. So from a technical perspective, we look like a big gas plant. So we provide all the kind of system strength, if you've heard of that terminology, and services that can help actually relieve the dispatch down problem. So that saving comes from, if we can agree with Sony what we need to look like to the power system, so how we need to plug into it, and we can get that plug right, then actually we help relieve the problem that they currently have. We think they'll have solved it by the time we get there, but we would then be a further aid to removing that problem by looking like we're a big generator, rather than looking like we're something that makes it harder to put renewables on the system.
Then how, and this is sort of my kind of ignorance and all of it, but if you tender for not yourselves, for a wind farm, solar farm, whatever. So if you're tendering at a price, you've obviously built in the dispatch down costs to your tender price. So how is there then, you're getting paid that regardless, or I'm trying to work this through in my head. So if we're tendering for if I own a wind farm, just for easy, right, and I say I'm supplying at this cost, that's the tender cost at this point in time for the next 10-15 years, even if this is solved in 5 years, I still get paid the same price. So I'm trying to work out how the consumer gets cheaper electricity. Sorry, that's where I'm going.
Are you talking about the new?
Where's the
renewable-
saving in the dispatch down? If you're saying we can move energy, I get that. You can move it from here to Scotland, and we just had a storm, and we see where we need energy. So I get all the benefits of that. But what I'm saying is the dispatch down is the waste. Effectively, you're not losing the waste, but you're already building that cost into your price whenever you would tender initially. So how is there?
It depends on which. We're getting quite some level of technical detail, I guess. But it depends on what's caused, which bit of the dispatch down you're dealing with.
Okay.
So a lot of the reason that renewables is being dispatched down is because of the fact you need to have gas plants operating in the system at the moment, because you need the inertia. In order the system isn't very fragile, you need this kind of big moving plants connected to the system. That means, but they have to, when they do that, they have to produce a certain amount of energy. So that can't be provided by renewables. What you can do with modern interconnected technologies is you can provide that, but at zero energy. So you can then dispatch the things that would have been overtaken by gas plants back to renewables, because we're providing the inertia, the kind of magic, without any energy, but as therefore you can dispatch those renewables back up again. So that's the critical thing. It's like the low carbon inertia services. They are zero energy output, but give you that kind of inertia to keep the system stable. Modern interconnected technologies can do that too, and provide those kind of services. And so that's the saving. You don't take the wind farm off and put the gas plant on. You dispatch the wind farm, and you don't need the gas. So that's where the saving comes from. That dispatch and redispatch is the cost that we would then say we'll be saving for the system. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I
feel like I need to draw a picture, but
it's fundamentally you're trying to get cheaper. Two issues here. You're trying to renew your renewables and cleaner energy, but we're also trying to make a saving to the consumer and get the cheapest price to the consumer fundamentally. So it's how you do that.
Yeah, and it's not it's a complex web, because if you're paying support costs to a wind farm, that comes from somewhere, and therefore you have to work all these things around. It's very, very complicated. I think you have to bring it up a level and go, actually, secure supply is really important. We need to be able to refine route to market for our renewables. Therefore, overall, strategically, this is important. You can find any scenario that's either good or bad for any of these kind of projects, whether it's long duration storage, whether it's renewables, whether it's interconnection. There'll be sets of assumptions you can make that look them good, bad, or other. If this is a strategic piece of infrastructure, so I think you need to keep it at that level in my mind, that it'll never be not full in the end. It's like any transmission.
Thank you to the panel for coming in this morning. It's really very interesting. It was very, very technical too. And I just want to ask a question about your investors. You've got private investment of $750 million, and that is assured, in the project. When you consider the risks, is there, and the process is going through, would you anticipate, or what would you anticipate if there's a point where through the planning process there is a delay in this to reach your targets for implementation?
Yeah, that's it. It's a risk that we face on all of our projects, and we unfortunately do have experience of projects that have been held up by the planning process, and it's really challenging, because you're trying to bring everything together at a single point in time where all of your contracts, all of your planning permissions, all of your environmental consents, everything aligns at the same time. And if that schedule starts to kick back, then obviously trying to keep everything evergreen, if you like, whilst that process runs through is a real challenge. But it is something that we have experienced. It's something that we're familiar with. It's something that specialists within our team do what they can to ensure that the applications that we make are fit for purpose, and therefore things do go to time. But it's always two sides of the table, right? The applicant and the competent authority. And these are big infrastructure projects with complex assessments that surround them. So it's right that they do take
I'm just
time.
thinking from our point of view as a committee as well, how we learn. We're always challenged for delivery, and how we learn that the process that you're going through and how it can be made better to help developers through the process.
I think that's very much music to my ears, and it would be wonderful to have a more detailed conversation about it. The EU did or does have regulation in place, which puts in place time limits for applicants to make their applications and for competent authorities to determine them. Unfortunately, it doesn't quite seem to have the repercussions when those timelines aren't met. I think working with a competent authority to agree a reasonable timetable up front and having the confidence that everyone will deliver to that is probably our best approach for this project, and that's what we're seeking to do.
Kate?
Thank you. It's so interesting. Thank you so much. I sat on the British-Irish Parliamentary Assembly earlier on in the year, and I was on the Economy Committee, and we did an inquiry into government energy strategy. And I knew absolutely nothing about any of this, and it's still magic to me how the interconnectors work. But we were told a lot about how there was a memorandum of understanding signed between the Irish and British government in 2023. Have you seen much difference in policy and much action since that was signed?
I don't think we have. We're connecting to Northern Ireland, whereas obviously it was more directed at the Republic. So
okay, no, just in terms of kind of best practice and how they're operating. If you've learned anything, because you're connecting it to Northern Ireland, but we're part of the single energy market.
Yes, which is it's a complicating factor in terms of how we think about it. But yes, I mean, we have good engagement with DESNZ, the GB government department, and they're an active participant, and especially now we've got over the hurdle of the Ofgem decision. We're now in regular contact with them and Ofgem. So that they've been doing this for quite a long time. So they've got a lot of understanding inside that department. I don't think there's not been a marked difference. I don't think as what we've seen since then.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah.
A lot of the questions that I wanted to ask have already been touched on. Just the ownership model for Lyric. What is that going to be?
So I can touch on that. So currently it's a wholly owned entity of Transmission Investment. The aim is for us to take the project to the end of the development phase, probably by ourselves. And at that point, we will consider whether we wish to introduce additional equity owners alongside us. And our aim is to also project finance this project, which is to introduce debt finance into the project as well, to assist with the overall construction costs.
Okay.
And the regulatory regime that I was referring to in GB, the cap and floor, has been successfully used with that model for 2 projects in recent years. The one Green Link between GB and the Republic, and also a project called NeuConnect between GB and Germany, which is currently under construction. So this is a sort of tried and tested pathway in a fairly early stage sector that's starting to get more test cases
Yeah.
under the belt. Yeah.
Can I just add to that? I mean, essentially, it's private investment. It doesn't fall on the consumer bill. I think somebody asked that question earlier, perhaps didn't address that, but it doesn't fall on the consumer bill. It's paid through by the market.
Right.
So it's not that it falls on the Northern Ireland bill. It will be funded by private investor.
Key asks that you have for this committee, then you've talked about how not having the revenue regime in Northern Ireland is a significant gap. If you were to summarise kind of 3 key things that you want from us off the back of this, what would they be?
I think it's about keeping a view on how we make sure this policy works in the broadest sense for all of the islands. I think that's the thing for me, is that the opportunity, I think, is to look more broadly, because the potential to trade off between the two ends is I think is there, but the regulators naturally have to sit in their own lanes, and it's the departments, the government departments, that can provide that kind of guidance, that we should look at an overall framework for this, if it's something that wants to be investigated. So I think it's about making sure that perhaps this committee could be asking questions of the department on have they thought about how these things might work in terms of their policy deliberations over the next few months, and making sure that they are thinking broadly enough and engaging enough with DESNZ and between utility regulation and Ofgem to think through what is the right mechanism, what is the right model, and the risk is that because there was one existing in Great Britain, one existing in the Republic, you could pick that up and go, well, that's the answer, and it's 50-50 two ends, and it's very simple. Is that the right answer? It's we want people to be thinking broadly to make sure it's the right answer for Northern Ireland, not necessarily just purely cut and paste. I think it has to be thought through that way. To be.
Thank you. We can certainly ask those questions.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, and colleagues, thank you very much for coming along. I think it's clear from the committee that there's a clear support in terms of everyone's aim of lowering customers' bills, of ensuring energy security, and also all playing our role in terms of meeting our legislative targets. So thank you very much for your representations. We will certainly follow up on a number of issues with the department and no doubt be in touch with you. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you
very much, everybody. Thanks for your questions.
You.
Very good. Very good.
Gold exploration.
Cool. Why is it purple?
Thank you, broadcasting.
Okay, Peter.
Members, just following that briefing, are you content for the committee to write to Transmission Investment and just seeking further information on their model for the percentage inflow and outflow of electricity to and from Northern Ireland, and also around for a breakdown of the dispatch down costs for Northern Ireland, because that was apparently an SEM number, which I didn't realise. Also to write to the department, just seeking a timescale on the policy development for policy interconnection, and also in terms of long duration storage. Excuse me. Is the committee also then content to maybe seek a further briefing from the utility regulator in respect of the RP7 price control final determination? Mr. Honeyford was asking a number of questions about how does this all work, how does it all fit together. So the utility regulator has issued its final determination for NIA, that's RP7. Maybe we find out a little bit more about that. It's just these things do pop up every now and then. What are consumers paying for? Example, the Stormont one, etc. So that might be of interest if members are content, Chair.
Yeah, and maybe once we get that briefing, we can share it with all members of the Assembly so they're aware of the regulatory framework here in Northern Ireland before they make other comments. But that's a political point that I shouldn't be making from the chair here today. So, yeah, let's do that. We will move on to item 7, which is Dundalk Institute of Technology Cross-Border Educational Cooperation. We are delighted to welcome our friends and colleagues from the Institute. So we have Aidan Brown, Innovation and Business Development Manager, Dr. Sheila Flanagan, Vice President of Academic Affairs and Registrar, Professor Fergal McCarthy, Head of School of Information and Creative Arts, and Irene McCausland, Vice President for Strategy, Communications and Development. Colleagues, you're all very welcome here to the committee today. Thank you for giving up your time to engage with the committee. And I'm very happy to hand over to you if you wish to give an opening statement.
Thank you very much for inviting us this morning. I'm delighted to be here on behalf of the Institute with my colleagues. I think this has been a long time coming. The first communication in relation to this was back in April, so we're delighted to be with you. We have, for those of you who maybe are less familiar with Dundalk Institute of Technology, we have a student population of approximately 5,000. Students, 500 staff, many of whom, both students and staff, cross the border each day. So we're very much embedded in what we call the region of South Down, North Louth. Our catchment area in terms of student recruitment stretches into South Armagh, South Down, County Louth itself, North Meath, North Dublin, with the train links now into Dundalk and bus services, and across into County Monaghan as well. So they would be the main areas from which we draw both staff and students. We regard ourselves as being very much, serving the region. And so in that context, the students who we recruit and graduate across the 4 schools. We have 4 schools, School of Informatics and Creative Arts, which Fergal is the head of, a School of Business and Humanities, School of Health and Science, and a School of Engineering. The students from across the 4 schools are recruited on an undergraduate and postgraduate basis. So we have students who come in for what we call level 7 degrees, ordinary pass level degrees in all 4 schools. Level 8 honours degrees, we have masters, thought masters programmes, and we have PhD and masters by research as well, so we go up to that level. We also have a considerable number of apprenticeship students now who are coming to us in sort of blocks, largely in the engineering area at the moment, but we're looking at other forms of apprenticeship in the business area as well. All of our students who graduate, whether they're at postgraduate or undergraduate level, we like to think that they are students who are coming away with an industry focus. So hence, obviously, I suppose maybe the crossover with the Committee for the Economy. Our students are ready to hit the ground running. Many of our programmes at undergraduate level, over nearly 70% of our programmes have a structure placement element within them. Students on placement could be in placement in the Republic of Ireland or in Northern Ireland. It's across the region. Students who graduate from undergraduate programmes in our first destination survey at the end of each academic year. This survey is undertaken about 6 months out. We find that up to 87% of them, it varies between 84 and 87% of them, are employed in a discipline area that they wish to be in, that's relevant to the degree, and they're employed broadly within the region. I don't know what the other 13% are doing. I'm sure they're having a great time.
Some of them are, some of them move on to higher education,
Yes,
or move
yes.
on to masters
Yes.
and other programmes.
Yeah.
Or they might be involved in politics.
Might even be.
That's a job too.
So on the industry connection is very, very important to us. It's core to what we do.
Yeah, I think like we have just completed our strategy there for 2024 to 2028, and we look at our strategy across 4 thematic areas. So teaching and learning, access and participation, because trying to ensure that particularly potential students and candidates from disadvantaged communities are not disadvantaged. So we have to look at pathways. So we have a huge strategy around our links with the FE sector and finding those pathways into higher education. And the other area is research and innovation. And like I say, we do up to level 10, which is PhD, but our engagement with industry is very focused there. We do a lot of applied research with industry and engage industry in our whole innovation agenda. And then the other one is engagement, is our fourth pillar. And our fourth pillar is around engagement with industry, but also with the wider community, because we're very embedded within the community. Like we say, we have 500 staff, we have 5,000 students plus 1,000 apprentices. But I think our location is extremely important, because we very much see ourselves as midpoint between the two major cities of Belfast and Dublin along that economic corridor, and that very much influences our engagements and who we do business with. We do a lot of work with the University of Ulster and a lot of work with Queen's University.
And then in terms of some joint programme development, we're doing work with Southern Regional College at the moment as well. And this has, I suppose, led into our past record. I suppose our track record with Southern Regional has helped in terms of the Peace Plus initiatives that we have applied for, and we've been successful in terms of 3 that have been confirmed, and the largest one is the SECPA one that I alluded to in the documentation, which Fergal is leading out on, which is a very nice example of serving the needs of the region in terms of, we've done a survey in preparation for the Peace Plus application, looking at skills deficits within the border area, our shared border area. We've looked at the capacity and capability of both Southern Regional and ourselves to fill that gap, but also working in alignment with industry. Maybe Fergal, you want to expand a little bit on that?
Yeah, so DKIT is ideally situated within the region, as Sheila has mentioned, of serving Armagh, South Down, Monaghan, Cavan and Louth in relation to that as well. So within that region we've got a lot of different sizes of companies. So we work very closely with industry, from 1-2-man companies right up to multinational organisations. And they all have something in common in that they need graduates from the region as well. So Dundalk Institute can provide some of those graduates, but we also need to look to the further education and the regional colleges in relation to that. And when we look at the region, we think of the further educational colleges in Monaghan and Cavan as well. But when we look north, we think of Southern Regional College. So it actually was a coming together within the SACPA project of bringing the educational establishments that we can produce the graduates for the region, but also looking at what industry required within the region as well. So we carried out extensive surveys within the industry in terms of 3 different areas. We looked at the ICT sector, we looked at the biopharma sector as well, and we also looked at the business and sports sector. And from with engaging with those organisations and those companies, we were able to gather from that valuable information in terms of what are the gaps that these companies have. And it's important that we look at the different sizes of companies as well, because the large multinational companies who quite often visit us in DKIT want to set up within the region as well, because as Sheila has mentioned as well, we are central within that Dublin to Belfast corridor as well. It's very attractive for organisations to set up within the area. But in order to set up within the area, they want to be ensured that they've got the correct graduates with the correct skill sets. So that was why it was important that we performed this study to find out what those gaps were, and then to work with our educational partners and with our industry partners to bring this project together. So the project has been funded. We're just about to commence it, and we're really excited to get going in relation to that project.
It's our biggest Peace Plus, I think, project. We have a number of applications in, 3 confirmed, but the SECPA one would be the most generously funded. But it's also based on, as Fergal has mentioned, a pre-existing relationship with both Cavan Institute, Monaghan Institute and Southern Regional. And that helped enormously in terms of putting together the application in the first place. Prior to Peace Plus, we had a relationship, again, looking at needs within the region with Southern Regional in the sciences area. So, for example, we were aware that Wuxi Biologics were coming into the region, into the IDA industrial park close to us. And first time that a company of that nature had come outside of China to invest in the West. Now, they've unfortunately recently said that they're withdrawing, but when they came in, there was certainly great excitement and they had a need for highly skilled graduates. We ourselves and the IDA sold the project to them, the Industrial Development Authority sold this project to them on the basis of a flow of graduates, but we couldn't do it on our own. So we linked with Southern Regional so that together we could provide employment opportunities and a flow of graduates to that particular company. So the relationships were already established before the application for the SECPA project through Peace Plus.
And there's quite a complementary link up as well with Southern Regional College, looking at the level 5s and the level 6s, which are the level 3s and level 4s, and then we will look at the higher level awards in relation to that as well. So and then we're looking at programs that fairly much will commence in Southern Regional College, and then they will finish their last 2 years with ourselves and Dundalk Institute of Technology as well, and perhaps may go on then to perform PhDs after that as well. So there's a nice pathway, as you'd mentioned previously, Irene, in relation to that as well.
So my role is basically managing the Regional Development Centre. So it's an innovation and incubation centre on campus. Our role is very much where a major stakeholder voice. We sit on lots of different fora within the region, fundamentally supporting enterprise and innovation development. And some of the bigger initiatives that we're involved in is of the last number of years has been around clustering and clustering around specific sectors. So we would have been a founding member of the FinTech Corridor Initiative, which is the Belfast to Dublin initiative. In engineering, we're looking at clustering the Focused Engineering Network, which is the northeast region, and lots of links into supply chain on a cross-border basis. And we're a lead organisation in an initiative around connected health, and we've developed that to about 70 organisations, and are now looking at what links we can look in the north. One of the other initiatives that we have, which is a huge opportunity, which is the East Coast Offshore Wind Cluster, which is only starting. But through that engagement, we would have engaged with NEMO, Northern Ireland Marine and Offshore Cluster, and DBEC, the Dublin Belfast Economic Corridor, looking at what that opportunity was on the Belfast to Dublin coast. What came out of that was we had applied for funding to Intertrade Ireland to look at a feasibility study, and Intertrade Ireland have now taken that on themselves as opposed to funding us to do it. So that's actually a piece of
your
work.
idea.
Sorry?
They stole your idea.
Yeah, more or less. But we get to sit on the steering committee and make sure that the direction's right. So that actually this quarter, the end of this quarter, that piece of research will come out and will actually, and I've seen some of the early drafts, and I think it demonstrates that there is a huge opportunity from Belfast from Belfast to Dublin on that. Our role is very much about enterprise development. We've a small team, but we've very much leveraged our relationships and funding. Funding's crucial to make anything happen. Intertrade Ireland is a huge opportunity that allows us to work with companies, and we leverage the Innovation Boost mechanism, which is significant funding for companies in the north to engage with us, and we've had some really good track records across all of Northern Ireland within that. And then, as we mentioned, the Peace Plus projects, we've had the success of SECPA, but we've also had the success of the mini DigiHubs, which is a €6.1 million project. So that's DKIT. We're developing a mobile digital lab that will actually it'll operate in a hub and spoke model, where we're able to go out to the councils and the communities that the councils represent, to be able to offer training and innovation workshops in the whole digital sphere on that. That's a major project. And then some of the other ones that are in the mix in terms of SME support, one led by Invest NI that we were invited into play, and that's about €15 million. It's called the Nexus Plus, and that's in the thematic area 2.1 for SME support. And on the social innovation side, I've been involved with the Southeastern Regional College on what's called the Midas project, and that's very much social innovation and trying to get communities to develop social enterprises. And then I suppose one of the last kind of activities that I've been involved in, or we're trying to get activity in, is we've had a pilot project that was funded by Enterprise Ireland, very much regionally focused, and that was for getting more females involved in technology businesses, and that's either startups or existing businesses, so the whole management capability side. So we're looking now at how we can scale that up, and there's an opportunity with the Shared Island funding. There is one pillar in that for female entrepreneurship. So we're currently in discussions with Catalyst NI and Southern Regional College. So I actually have a meeting this Friday with Catalyst with their senior team to look at developing a cross-border opportunity within that.
Thanks, Aidan.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. It's really good. I have a number of questions, but my colleague Padraig Delargy kindly has been very interested in the subject, so in deference to Padraig, I'm going to allow him in first.
First thing for everything. Listen, thank you very much for coming to the committee. I think it's very welcome, and I suppose we had a presentation a number of months ago from some of the regional colleges in the north, and we felt that it was really important on the back of that both your voices and those of ATU and of other institutions in the south, particularly around border regions, were heard as well. So really appreciate you coming up, and really appreciate the committee inviting and extending the invitation as well. I suppose I had 4 questions really. The first one was around linking apprenticeships on an All-Ireland basis. Second one's going to be around your links with the northern institutions. You've talked around that already. Third one, just a wee bit around credit transfer and the QQA report. And then the fourth one, just around commuting versus online, I suppose your geographic location. So in terms of my first question, around the apprenticeships, one of the issues, and Chair, sorry, I should have declared an interest because I have some cousins who actually went to DKIT. But in terms of linking apprenticeships on an All-Ireland basis, one of the issues in the Northwest, which we see sometimes when people are either going to Northwest Regional College trying to do an apprenticeship in the South, is sometimes we see a barrier to that in terms of trying to get employer insurance and all the, I suppose, bureaucracy around that. So in terms of that, I'm keen to just get a better understanding of, is that an issue in your area? And if so, how are you trying to work on that with employers?
Employer insurance, as far as I'm aware, Pádraig, isn't an issue for us through apprenticeships, the apprenticeship programs that are run in collaboration with Solace on our on campuses in the Republic of Ireland. It's not something that has been raised. The main issues for us in terms of just the apprenticeship area, Pádraig, would be around, I suppose, our desire and need maybe to move into broader and new areas of apprenticeship. The apprenticeship offerings have been in traditional apprenticeship areas such as plumbing, carpentry, and so on and so forth. But we've seen that there's real opportunity, and I think ATU through their Sligo campus have been quite successful in terms of developing apprenticeships in collaboration with the insurance companies, for example. So we'd see opportunities for maybe more different disciplines being serviced through the apprenticeship mode. But there's certainly no doubt there's no lack of demand. I don't know when your cousins were in DKIT, but certainly leaving there this morning, the car parks were chock-a-block with the apprenticeship blocks that we have in at the moment, and there's demand for more. So there's a steady demand there, but the issue of insurance has never been raised for us.
And we're just now about to embark on a 13 million euro refurbishment of part of our PJ Carroll factory for additional apprenticeship blocks. We would have blocks of around 72 blocks of apprenticeship, a block being 16 students. And now we can have the capacity when this is completed to move up to 96. So it's like in the trades, carpentry, electrician, plumbing and motor mechanics. But we now want to move out to things like, refrigeration and maybe look more at the renewable areas. So you're very much linking those into, the traditional crafts. But because of the Solace model and because we would deal with 2 phases of apprenticeship and the ETBs deal with the others, there isn't that issue. Because it's very much linked in with the employers anyway.
Okay, no, that's really interesting, and I suppose it kind of highlights, I suppose, the flexible nature of your courses, the ability to respond to industry and stuff. So that's really encouraging to hear that. In terms then, you talked already about your engagement with northern institutions, particularly with CERC, with Southern Regional College and so on. So is there any kind of, and sorry if I've missed this, but is there any kind of formal tertiary arrangement that you have, or do you have any MOUs or anything like that, or how specifically does that work? It's really encouraging that those relationships exist, but I'm just keen to get a better understanding of how they work in practice.
Sure. We have, as I said at the outset, quite a long-standing relationship with Southern Regional College. So, for example, with the Wuxi Biologics industry alignment that I talked about earlier, we, through our science school, developed a relationship with Southern Regional whereby students who were completing 2 years in Southern Regional on science-related programs were aligned with our science degree program, our 4-year honours degree program, so that what we call it is a 2+2 model, so that students coming off the non-degree programs in Southern Regional would be in a position to come directly into year 3 of our honours degree program, having, we've aligned years 1 and year 2 so that all of the modules and all of the credits can transfer across seamlessly. Now, we're not just doing that with Southern Regional, but we're also doing it with Monaghan and with Cavan as well. And we have MOUs covering all of those relationships. So, for example, and there is opportunity for more of this, and it will be covered through Fergal's SECPA project. As well, because that's going to be part of what we're doing, this idea of developing 2+2s with our regional partners. I'll give you an example from Cavan Institute, where they have a 2-year, what we would call a level 6 program in audio and music production. And they were looking for opportunities for their graduates to align with a degree program within the region. We have a 4-year degree program in that area. So when Cavan Institute were developing their program, their year 1 and year 2 is an exact match for our year 1 and year 2. So the students can stay in Cavan, they can do their 2 years. If they want to finish at that point, that's fine. But up to 10 of them, there is a plan for up to 10 to 15 of them to transfer directly across into year 3. So, there are many benefits for parents and students in relation to that arrangement. It allows students from that area to stay at home for 2 years, and then for their final 2 years, they either can commute to us or travel. And under the SECPA project, the Peace Plus project, we have plans for similar types of arrangements. So we would have an articulation agreement that covers each of those programs, and then we have an overarching MOU. It's, when we go out to student recruitment fairs, and I've been at them in Newry, for example, increasingly parents say to us, we want our kids to remain at home. All students drive these days, or almost at a minimum. Hence, the car parks are full. But they can't afford to live away from home, and there's a shortage of student accommodation nationally at this stage. So it makes sense to develop these types of arrangements whereby, in fact, students are they're getting a year 1 and year 2 of a degree programme in their local college, and then coming onwards directly, as I say, into year 3.
Yeah, just maybe to pick up on that as well, just directly in relation to the SECPA programme as well. So I mentioned we've got 3 clusters there. We've got the software development cluster, we've got the biopharma cluster, and we've got the business sport cluster. So with the SRC, and particularly looking at the northern partner in the project, we're working on that 2+2 basis as well, where the students will actually perform their first 2 years in computing in the Southern Regional College, and then they will progress into the last 2 years in Dundalk Institute of Technology, and similar with the science programme and similar with the business programmes as well. That's what we've basically set up in our articulation agreement with them, and also with the partnership agreement across the SECPA project in relation to that as well.
It's part of our initiative in terms of trying to retain talent within our region as well. We see that as being really important, and it's part of our remit. If students leave the region, they go to, in our case, to Dublin, or in your case, maybe to Manchester or Liverpool, or Glasgow or Edinburgh, they don't tend to come back. And so there's talent lost within the region, and that was something that I think came out very strongly in the research that you undertook, Fergal, as part of the Peace Plus prior research.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, and it's really encouraging. I suppose you've kind of nearly answered my second question around the credit transfers and stuff, because that obviously can be an issue, but you've obviously been proactive on that, which is fantastic to hear. And it offers students an opportunity, and I suppose that's the key. It's that you have all opportunities at home, and some students will choose to go away, and that's fine. But it creates that opportunity here in terms of widening access and participation as well. So really encouraged to hear that. Just the last point then, I suppose, was around, obviously you've mentioned your geographical location, and something I'm very aware of, and in terms of where you are in terms of industry and the growing industry in Dundalk and around the Louth area in particular. So in terms of commuting routes, you've mentioned the Armagh and Newry, even from north parts of Dublin, and I'm sure with Meath and areas like that as well. But in terms of your online sort of presence, is that something that is there presently? Is it something that you're looking to increase? Because I know quite a number of students would contact our office. I'm our further and higher skills spokesperson. So a number of students would contact our office and say, look, we really do want that online provision. It's something that I suppose just with care and responsibilities, childcare responsibilities, so on, there's that flexibility. So thanks very much for your answer so far, and just a wee bit more information on that would be great.
Yeah, so online is something that is definitely front and central in how we're moving forward, and we're actually going through programmatic review now at the minute. So we've 4 schools within the college as well. 2 are actually embarking upon programmatic review over the next couple of months, and then the other 2 schools, one of which is the School of Informatics and Creative Arts, will be doing that this time next year. But one of the items that fairly much has come up for discussion within programmatic review is online, just for the very reasons that you have mentioned there as well. That students, a lot of them have got other commitments outside of their programs at the minute. A lot of students are actually working, and they may have care commitments as well. So we need to embrace that as well, and that is something that we're looking at now in programmatic review, so that we are making sure that our programs do meet that need in terms of the online facility as well. And just even that's thinking in terms of undergraduate. From a postgraduate perspective then, because we are fairly much at 100% employment at the minute, we found that, particularly if you take my area, which is software development, everyone that has performed a software development degree has got a job at the minute. They're not going to give up that job, a well-paid job, to actually come and do a full-time, face-to-face program. So we had to change our thinking in relation to that. So all of our postgraduate programs now are online, and they're part-time as well. So postgraduate is moving that way. Undergraduate is gradually moving in that way as well. And we're moving in to meet that need as well in relation to that. So we have to listen. One of the things that we're very strong at is listening. So we pride ourselves in actually listening to what students want, what parents want as well, but also what industry wants. Mm-hmm. So we would work very closely with industry to making sure that our programs are preparing the students to succeed whenever they actually go into industry as well. So we listen to the students and we listen to industry in relation to that, particularly from listening to students and their feedback. The online element is coming up again and again. So that's something that we are currently looking at.
Brilliant. Listen, I really appreciate your answers, and thanks to the Chair for letting me on as well. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Problem at all. I'll ask a couple of questions if that's okay. Just in terms of the students, then 5,000, how many of them do you think are from Northern Ireland?
Around 7%.
Okay.
Yeah. It varies between 7 and 10%. We've, I provided you with a table, a pre-COVID and post-COVID table, and unfortunately the trend is downward at the moment, and there are reasons for this. Yeah.
And then in terms of staff, 500, would there be a similar percentage from the?
Yeah, about 10%, around 50, 60 staff. Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And in terms of the placements you have with the apprentice in Northern Ireland companies, can you just speak to some of the examples of the companies that you partnership with here in Northern Ireland?
What's the question?
Where we'd have students on placement or working with companies in NI.
Oh yeah, so I suppose there's our placement office, our careers and placement office. They will place students anywhere where north and south. I suppose even with the Intertrade Ireland programs, there is a program project manager that is typically a graduate in that. The biggest challenge is particularly in sectors like engineering that tend to be very rural. So the students getting to those, and it's north and south, can be an issue. So that's a big challenge for us in terms of placement. In particular sectors tend to be more rural, and the border counties with heavily engineering sector wise, that would be a big issue. But yeah, we've our placement is north south. It's and then there are other sectors that from an IT perspective, they're not so much an issue. They tend to be more kind of located in the larger towns or in the cities, so not an issue.
Maybe if I can jump in on that one as well. Ian. So from a software perspective, then obviously software is a very portable skill.
Of course.
So we would basically be a mixture of companies within the region, but then we would have a lot of our placement students would actually be placed in both Dublin and Belfast then as well. But then we'd have a few local companies, the likes of Statsports and Uri, the likes of First Derivatives would take quite a few students as well. And then we'd have local spin-out companies in Dundalk that would have come out of the college as well. But certainly that from a software perspective would tend to be more geographically located rather than just locally as well.
And then just in relation to widening participation, something that I'm particularly interested in, I don't think our universities in Northern Ireland are as good as they should be in terms of ensuring that their student makeup is reflective of the society in which they operate, but indeed Northern Ireland as a whole. I'm just keen to learn some of the examples that you have implemented in terms of trying to ensure that your institution is reflective of the community that it operates.
Yeah, do you want to? I'll start off. Because this is a strategic pillar within our strategic plan. And it's a huge focus that we have, because we're very cognizant of the makeup of the student body, and it has changed a lot over the last decade, but access and participation is one of our key elements and one of our key strategies. And we would have what we call a performance agreement with our funder, which is the Higher Education Institute, and within this we have to set out our targets for access and participation over a 4-year period, and we're monitored on this each year. So we have a very dedicated set of targets. They're very quantitative in nature. So they talk about, the cohort of students that are coming from disadvantaged communities, from traveller, from Roma communities, and we have a whole suite of initiatives around that to support both getting the students into higher education through, like I say, pathways, etc. But once they're in, then we have to give them additional supports to make sure that their learning journey through the institute is one that's enriching, engaging, and that they do come out with their qualification at the end of it. So Sheila would be in charge of the support for the student support services. So if you maybe want to pick up on that
we
one.
have what's known as a National Access Plan that runs from 2023 to 2028. And it's a government plan. It has set targets within it that we have to try and match or meet. So that outlines for us what we have to do in relation to the different cohorts. So it would be, it would include, as Irene has said, we would have targets in relation to disability. And all ranges of not just physical disability, but students with mental health issues, students with autism, dyslexia, and so on. And then the next cohort that was introduced into it, because it is a bit of a moving feast, were travellers and Roma, and targets were set in relation to those. More recently, 2 additional groups have been added in, and we're only really starting to deal with those now, and we're working with Mountjoy Prison in Dublin in relation to this, our former prisoners, and it's under a programme called the Kick Start programme. So it's where we go into the prisons in advance of release, but then also maybe target people who are on release and back in their community. So, there have been a lot of issues, for example, in nearby Drogheda in recent years. So that's one of the target areas for us at the moment. And then more recently, within the last couple of months, another group that have come into the National Access Plan are carers. Carers who are looking after maybe children or elderly parents or disabled people at home, as well as those who are in receipt of care. So that's a new cohort that we're going to have to. The access plan, the National Access Plan, is midway through at the moment, and it's undergoing a review, a national review. So under the review, this new cohort are going to come into the framework as well. So I think in Dundalk we're fairly well. We're used to dealing with maybe non-traditional students because, and I won't say that, it's not easy as, new groups are added into the National Access Plan. It is a challenge, but many of, I would say almost the majority of our students who come to us are first generation to come to higher education. So it's new for their families, it's a new experience for them. And we're used to dealing with that, and we've been putting supports through our Learning and Teaching Centre in place to deal with those cohorts. So I suppose it wasn't such a challenge when these other groups then were added into the mix.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that when we get our student feedback every year, one of the things that our students say is that they really like our small class sizes, and they really feel that they have personable relationships with their lecturing team. So they're known by name, so they do feel it's a personable experience, and
What would
they
be
feel
the average class size?
About 20.
Yeah.
That's lectures as well.
So the lecture normally about 20 for lectures and for tutorials as well. But we could have some classes that you may have maybe 60, but then they're split into groups of 20.
Yeah.
So you'll maybe only have 1 lecture to a ratio of 2 practicals. So out of those 3, that 1 to 3 ratio, 2 of those would be basically in that class size of 20. And something that we would do from a school perspective as well would be that we would basically add additional supports around the institutional supports as well, where we would have, our programme director would be very active across all 3 years or 4 years of the programme to actually get to know the students individually. And then we would also put a first year convener in place as well, which would interact very closely with all of the students, and particularly students that were struggling in particular. And then within the school that I'm from, the Informatics and Creative Arts, we would have 2 additional supports then as well. We'd have an IT Learning Centre, which would specifically support students that were struggling in particular modules, and be additional supports put in place in relation to those. And also there's a maths learning centre as well, because lots of students struggle with maths, so we put additional supports in place in around that in relation to maths as well.
And then you have a balance between continuous assessment and exam-based.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, to support
That's
that
really
as well.
great to hear. Thank you for that. Sinead?
Okay, and thank you to the panel for coming up and giving us your briefing. In terms of outputs of the programme, you've said that the impacts include enhanced labour mobility, reduced economic activity, and a sustainable model for cross-sector collaboration. Do you have any specific approach in terms of measuring the decrease that you hope to see, and how that success will be measured going forward?
So there's crude ways of measuring it, and there's not so crude. So the crude ways of measures are the amount of participants that we're going to actually have across those three different areas of software, biopharmaceutical, and business and sport. So our aim is to actually bring 3,600 people to be engaged within these various programs across the different FE colleges and Dundalk Institute of Technology as well. And then our overall aim is to have approximately 2,500 graduates from these programs. So as a starting point, that's our two, the amount of enrolments that we're going to have, and then the amount of students that are actually going to complete that. But along the journey then, there's also going to be a lot of interaction with the students themselves, but also with the companies that are actually taking part in this whole program as well. And we will be fine-tuning the offering as we proceed through the program as well. So there's going to be not just the interactions with the participants, but also the interactions with industry to find out a lot more about what it is that they want the graduates from these programs to actually achieve as well. But it's actually fantastic for the companies within the region as well, because a lot of them actually struggle to find the types of upskilling programs within the area, and online was mentioned previously as well, because even if the companies can find these programs that tend to be they're maybe across the water in England, they're maybe in Dublin, and the companies can't actually release their staff. So we're working with the companies at the minute to actually to make sure that we bring these programs in a part-time capacity and an online capacity that actually works with the companies as well. We're also going to be bringing some of the programs are actually going to be delivered directly into the companies themselves. Some of them are also going to be bringing a number of people from the different companies. Are going to come to DKIT, they're going to come to SRC, they're going to come to Cavan, and it provides an opportunity for those employees of those companies to engage with employees from other organisations as well. So there's lots of interactions, lots of learnings, both from an employer perspective, both from a student perspective, but also from ourselves, in terms of, from an educational perspective then as well. And also one of the big benefits that we want to see from a Dundalk perspective in this as well is that there will be a lot more knowledge from northern students in terms of what actually exists within Dundalk Institute of Technology as well, and vice versa from our students and from companies as well that we have from the Monaghan, Cavan, Louth perspective, what actually exists within Southern Regional College as well. So I think that it'll be opening a lot of doors for all parties within the project as well.
Yeah, and I mean, I represent the Foyle constituency, and I understand the benefits of that cross-border sharing of educational, I suppose, an educational escalator, I suppose, maybe you would call it, where you can start in one place and finish off in another, and, that reciprocal arrangement. And so you've talked a lot about the educational institutions arrangements and shared arrangements. Have you got a memorandum of understanding, for example, with business organisations or business representative organisations on a cross-border basis? Because I know how important that is within the context of Derry Strabane and that Letterkenny corridor that we have there, and further on down, I suppose, even through to Sligo. So, there would be memorandums of understanding, with, for example, the Londonderry Chamber and the Letterkenny Chamber, and the arrangements that support the educational institutions to highlight and promote that type of sharing of you know, academia and the skills and the courses and the programs that are available. And is that alive and well and existing within that that corridor?
You know, the corporate partnership program.
Yeah. I suppose we represent DKT and IBEC on the cross-border partnership, which is formerly known as EURES. So we would have a formal agreement with them. So this is really supporting mobility and skills based, but more at a lower level skill base, and supporting industry to be able to recruit, which is a major issue at the moment. And it's trying to, the initiative is trying to fix, you know, Padraig mentioned some issues earlier. You know, we've seen where some companies who are employing cross-border people have had issues with, say, getting a mortgage, where the bank in Northern Ireland seen it as a risk that they were employed in the south. So we're heavily involved in that. You know, I mentioned the FinTech Corridor Initiative. We have a specific MOU with that initiative. It's its own not-for-profit company that's working with all of the education providers, you know, along that corridor, from the further education side right up to higher education. So we're working with them, and then we have specific relationships with the councils. So like the DBEC, for instance, we have, while we don't have a formal MOU with DBEC, we would work with them on specific initiatives like the EcoWind opportunity and that clustering. So we would be looking at partnering with them, and the same with the Chambers of Commerce. You know, we'd be a member of Chambers of Commerce, but no specific MOUs with them, and we would have deep relationships with them, but not formalised in a kind of an MOU. And then with you know, with funded opportunities, we tend to have agreements specifically with individual companies, where we're either working on a research and innovation project, or you know, consultancy, or delivering bespoke training. For instance, we would have bespoke collaborative agreements in place for them.
In relation to the mobility issue as well, for students, do you see the challenges regarding the CAO and just how that they're not matching, and how are you seeking to maybe overcome some of those challenges as well?
We have well, there are a range of issues with the CAO at the moment, and I alluded to some of them in the briefing paper or document. The biggest issue facing us at the moment is the non-alignment with UCAS in terms of the issuing of A-level and Leaving Cert results. So students who apply to us are getting, we're the last in Europe now. We've done a survey. Our representative body, THEA, which is the Technological Higher Education Authority, did some work, and they have been lobbying on our behalf with the department and of further and higher education with regard to this, but Leaving Cert results come out towards the end of August. In Europe, it's the middle of July at the latest. You know,
we're even late with UCAS. We're even
and UCAS is even ahead of us now. It used to be broadly the same, but this has become a real issue because we're prohibited from making conditional offers, whereas at least under UCAS you can. So we can't. Whilst a student might apply to us for a degree programme, they'll get an offer from elsewhere in advance, and that's why the numbers are dropping. Now that is because of the late results, because we are trying to wash out the COVID impact from second level schools right through, and that won't finish until 27-28, and then it's hoped to bring the Leaving Cert results back to around the middle of August, more in alignment with A-level results, but it's a real issue.
It's a real problem, and it's a real problem in relation to participation on really good programmes on your doorstep, and students are afraid to hold out in case they lose out.
Exactly.
And it's really, really difficult, and that's why you see low participation, like that 10%, 7%. It's really, it's like, it's a known goal really for the whole of Ireland.
Yeah, it's a real frustration for us, and it's a real frustration for Sligo and Letterkenny as well, ATU. Because we do attract students from NI who are interested in some of the programmes. So it's we have been beating that drum to no avail through our representative organisation there for the past 3 years. And the inflexibility of this, if we could make conditional offers, I think that would resolve it.
If I can maybe just come in on that as well. So we would have open days throughout the year as well. And we would have a lot of really keen students from Northern Ireland, which I'm passionate about because I'm from Northern Ireland myself. So I'm very keen to bring the students to Dundalk. So students are really keen. They've heard fantastic feedback from both people that have actually previously attended Dundalk Institute of Technology, but mainly from employers, because employers really like the type of graduates that we produce because they hit the ground running, because they're very practical focused. So say within my area, software development, for example, students, whenever they come out of our programs, they're able to code. They're able to go in from day one, they are actually coding. If you come from the larger, more traditional universities, it's a lot more theory based. They're still fantastic students, but it's a lot more theory-based. So employers love those types of students. So particularly Northern students that have been interacting with companies that are within that domain want to come. Their parents want them to come. And then what actually happens is the gap. And they don't want to take that risk of waiting. They will take an offer from elsewhere, even if it means maybe going over to England.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I'm so sorry I had to pop out. I was getting a phone call that I've been waiting for a week. So if what I ask has been answered, just tell me. I'm going to go back and watch what I missed anyway. A lot was covered in terms of skills and pathways. It was really comprehensive and absolutely fascinating. What is your relationship in terms of engagement with industry? We keep hearing about how effective SkillsNet is in terms of skills, and do you notice the gaps? We don't have a specific agency in Northern Ireland. Is that something you notice in terms of your engagement with industry?
So for example, I mentioned the Peace Plus project Nexus that Invest NI are leading on. That's SME support and very much on training and development. SkillNet HQ is actually part of that project. And we would certainly see, we have a really deep relationship with a lot of the SkillNet organisations, and we find them that they've moved up. When the SkillNet started first, they were very much uncertified type courses, short kind of workshopy type activities, and they've now moved the bar up to certified right up to postgraduate level. So we've been working with across the country lots of different SkillNets. We're currently developing, for instance, in our business school, we have a Masters in Leadership, and we're partnering with the SkillNet to deliver a certificate in leadership, which is a part of that, and that's for industry. The challenge that we have been on the border is that a lot of companies that we will be engaging with, the SkillNet can't fund them. So we find that we can put the course on and they can join it, but they have to pay full fees. So it's a real challenge for us. But what we see is the SkillNet can bring the audience, the ready-made audience. They have they're typically industry-led. So the Chambers of Commerce are heavily involved in. There's IBEC are heavily involved in SkillNets. They've got 3 or 4 SkillNets in different sectors, and they tend to be sector-specific. We're engaging one at the moment now in the cultural and creative industries. And again, we've got companies we're engaging with on a cross-border basis that can't avail of that additional funding. So that is one of the challenges of the model that we have with engaging with SkillNet. They're actually a great partner It allows us to pilot, you know, they would pay development costs and allow us to pilot and offer subsidised courses at up to 80%. And you know, the challenge is that, you know, we can't engage with anybody in Northern Ireland.
No.
You know.
It was recently the Northern Ireland Chamber of Commerce have advocated for an independent skills development agency, and it seems it's really interesting to hear from a perspective working on a cross-border basis. Can I ask, maybe Fergal, it's for you, but in terms of, in your written submission, you talked about software development cluster, and particularly around teaching and use of AI. I'm fascinated by all of this. In terms of AI regulation and it being different north and south, how do you manage that?
Yeah, so AI, I think everyone's basically, in fact, just even the layperson on the street, AI is just that buzzword. But particularly in terms of this SACPA project in particular, companies at the minute, they're kind of sitting in different positions. Some of them are actually engaging in AI at the minute. But no matter what level of company it is, they feel they need to know about AI. They feel as if they're missing out. So that's why we've put, you know, a range of different programs together which will enable different types of companies to dip their toe in, really, in relation. Where I would say where we are particularly strong in the AI, and this is a word that I haven't really mentioned to date, and it was kind of a miss of me to do it. I've done a lot of research. We have different research centres, and one of the areas we are particularly strong in is artificial intelligence. So whenever we basically, and we've mentioned, you know, the skills gap as well, whenever we look at the skills gap that exists within industry, that's perfect for us, because we're actually performing research within that whole AI area. One of the things that we're always looking for in terms of, from a research perspective, is what is the real problems that need to be solved. So within this SACPA program, what we're doing is we're actually bringing the research that we have performed in that area and actually bringing it so that it actually meets the real needs within industry. And that means that we're not just delivering AI programs because, you know, this is what it says in the tin. What we're doing is we're actually looking at, you know, futuristic AI, that where the technology is going from a research perspective, and actually making it that we really are making a difference in terms of that skills gap and need. And that's why we've done particularly well in terms of, you know, the skills nets type of program, because we're very active in terms of research and with our different research centres. And I'm going to be biased from a software perspective, obviously. We're always looking ahead of the game in terms of where is the next big challenges, where are the problems. So whenever a call comes out for a Skills Nets program, we've been working with industry to identify what those problems are. We've developed the research around it, and then we just bring it together and actually bring it out to the industry. So the SACPA program is kind of a large extension of that, and that we're not just hitting software, we're hitting biopharmaceutical, and we're hitting sports and business as well around it. Hopefully that has answered your question.
Yeah, it's it's fascinating, and we'll keep an eye out on things that you publish, because I think so often, we said this at a recent session, every conference you go to at the moment there's a panel on AI, but it's not always clear how it's being utilised. So actually that looking at the research and the skills gap makes perfect sense, and there's such a great role, and especially in terms of the cross-border kind of work as well.
Something maybe to add to that as well is, so from an academic perspective, there are challenges in terms of assessments with AI. Obviously, you know, you're worried about students using AI to generate their essays or whatever. So, you know, obviously we've found ways around that as well. But particularly from found ways around assessment, I mean, from a software perspective, if we do not embrace AI technology, we're dead in the water. And we see ourselves as being particularly strong in relation to that. So traditional universities, they will approach this from a theoretical perspective. We're particularly in our programmatic review, in all modules, we will be looking at it, you know, in terms of what's the basics that students need to know for this area, but then what tool sets are out there that can be used from an AI perspective, so that we can produce graduates that can embrace these tool sets and that can do things much more efficiently.
Yeah, so interesting. Thank you so much. Thank
We
you.
probably have time for one question from each of the last two members. David, if you have a question.
And just quickly, we've talked on this the shared sort of island piece, and something as a party we're really committed to and passionate about, and creating opportunities. You've kind of answered quite a bit of mine, because I was going to ask you about industry in the north and how the engagement there. But I suppose just going back to the CAO, this is the biggest barrier you have. You know, you're talking about 7% northern students. Your COVID results. I have a daughter in Dublin at uni, and the barrier that is created, it's almost like you don't want northern students. In fact, because it's next to, so the timeline, the lack of offer, the COVID inflated results, but it's the results of what a child here is having to, or a young person is having to deliver to access. And we're trying to create more opportunities, but this massive barrier. So just when we look at those, that CEO, what is there anything can be done, or is it just the government in the south or the department in the south are just deaf to it that allow that access?
I mean, the representations have been made through our agency, through THEA, the Technological Higher Education. I suppose it's because there are two of us impacted on the border dramatically in relation to this. But to your point, there are students who want to go to Dublin as well, who are impacted. We're the ones that are doing the most shouting about it, and certainly, there have been 2 papers submitted in relation to this from THEA. We have been on I've been on lunchtime radio talking about it as the Leaving Cert results come out, because the question comes up time and time again in relation to this issue. I think it might be useful maybe if perhaps we could get some statement, or if it was appropriate, or some short paper. It can be very short, a page or 2 pages, outlining your concerns. I would be very happy. I chair the Council of Registrars for the TUs and IoTs in the Republic of Ireland, the THEA Council of Registrars. I would be very happy to bring a paper or representation from this group to THEA to try and see if we can, if we could even relax it in terms of the conditional offers. That would make a huge difference. Because it gets dismissed as, it's just a problem for Dundalk, or it's just a problem for Letterkenny. It's not. It's a national problem.
Trinity was 10% northern students in 1998. The Good Friday Agreement. It's now less than 1.
Yes.
So there's an issue, but I'll not hog it. But I think that's something we should do. I'm happy to engage. Absolutely engage in that, because it was 2 weeks of our lives. Whenever waiting for that result.
But we would be delighted to, because it's going to become topical again now.
It will absolutely.
Over the next couple of months, and now's the time to do it.
Can I just add to that as well? So just from an economic perspective as well. So if we just even think of the SECPA project, but if we think of think even of Northern Ireland here, whenever students basically have got University and Queen's University, they've got a cap in places. They're limited in the amount of students they can take. We have students that basically then they can't get into both those colleges. They want a university education, so they're going to go to England. Lots of those students don't return. And we actually have got a huge problem then in that we have, this is where this project came out of, we will have the large multinational organisations will come to DKIT that want to set up within the region. We can't provide them with the graduates. And we're missing a real trick here. If we were able to get more Northern Ireland students to actually come to the Dundalk Institute, we could solve that problem. And then the students would stay within the region as well. Because one of the big statistics we have, I know the statistic you're always, I can't remember the number of it, but you'll remember that whenever students tend to go to DK, they stay within the region. They actually they don't leave the region as well.
Yeah, it's in the high 80s.
So I think we're missing a trick there.
Cheers, thank you.
Thank you, and Gary.
Just a brief comment, Chair, we're tight for time, so look, all of the questions have been asked. I just want to lend obviously my support to what you're doing. Obviously it's positive work. I think there's a bit of learning to be done in terms of the Northwest Strategic Growth Partnership. They have asked or seem to be saying that they want to take it to the next level, so we'll be watching the SEGPA project very closely to see how that goes, and certainly what learning we can take forward. But as I say, thank you very much for your time, and really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
On behalf of the committee, thank you very much for your time. We really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Peter.
Okay, Chairperson, so if is the committee content then to write to the Council of Registrars in line with what was suggested, just highlighting members' concerns about the late issue of conditional offers and the consequent impact on cross-border opportunities?
There's also the grade conversion issue. As somebody who applied to go to Trinity, despite having 4 A's at A level, I was still refused. So I have an interest in it. But no, I think it's the grade conversion also. They don't.
It's both, and the timeline.
Perfect. Are members content that we would just adjourn shortly for 2 minutes for a quick comfort break, and then we'll come back to that. Push the button there, guys.
Committee Room 30. Sound. 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 Committee Room 30, 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 sound.
Excellent. That's okay. So make sure that they're recorded. That's okay, Grant.
Perfect. Okay. We're delighted to be joined by our colleagues from RAISE, both on the 24-25 outturn and the 25-26 draft allocation to the department. Hopefully colleagues had some opportunity to see some of the information that had been provided by the department to this committee last week. Some useful information, some interesting definitions of budget pressures, but thank you very much for coming along here today, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. We're here from RAISE, the Finance and Economics Research Team, and we're going to present the paper that you have in front of you that looks at the budgetary and economic context in which the draft executive budget will be set. As you'll see from the paper, there's a number of challenges presented internationally as well as domestically as the department looks to address its existing and its planned implementation, programs, policies, and plans arising out of the economic strategy, which is also known as the economic vision, which came in place about a year ago. The briefing aims to help inform the committee's deliberations on boosting the economy. There is a very lengthy, essential context-setting information from sections 1 through 5. The reason why we included the timeline is because you can see there have been a large number of developments, and those developments have occurred within Northern Ireland as well as from central government, and there are some developments in the new Irish government that has Northern Ireland implications. So we thought it important that that be set out for you. But the other sections of the paper we thought were important to revisit some economic theory and driving it into practice, and then obviously the international considerations where there are uncertainties at the moment. So we did look at the information that we had in relation to 24-25 budget and made some observations looking to inform the 25-26 budget and then beyond to 28. But there's still some information outstanding, and the clerk and we had agreed that we would leave the budget for now and look most closely at the initial considerations set out in section 6, okay, which look at economic, again, programs and areas of interest in terms of economic considerations that the committee may wish to look at. It's really important that we highlight to you that the paper obviously is not exhaustive. This is an enormous area that's being covered. So we consider this to be a starter paper to help inform the committee in its future deliberations on boosting the economy. Any future information, we've made an agreement with the clerk that when it comes through from the department, particularly in relation to the budget, that it'll be shared with us, and we will be seeking to secure further information from the department in relation to Excel spreadsheets, like delving further and further into it to increase more openness and transparency about this, so that the committee is better equipped to engage. So my colleagues are going to look at Section 6 of the paper for you, as I had said, looking at regional balance and innovation, as well as skills, higher education, tourism and energy, and then wrapping it up towards the end, looking more at funding considerations that arise out of UK Shared Prosperity Fund, City and Growth Deals and Shared Island Fund. Rating we won't be addressing today, but it is important that the committee is cognizant of that issue, because if the rating isn't achieved, the rating revenue generation isn't achieved, there will be shortfalls in terms of what will be available to allocate through the draft executive budget going forward. So whilst rating is within the portfolio of finance, it's still, this committee would need to give some consideration to potential shortfalls and seek guidance, or at least some interaction, engagement with the department and the minister for its plans if they don't receive what they need to fully achieve the economic vision. And the committee hopefully will learn more about the committee's prioritisation, for example, in relation to its bids, the rationale for why they prioritise beyond the quantum of the bid. So with that, Aidan will present first, followed by Michael and then Nathan. Thank you.
Thanks, Eileen. So as you say, I'm going to start looking at some of the policy areas that have an overlap with economic growth, and I'll specifically look at regional balance, innovation and tourism. So regional balance is one of the 4 pillars of the department's economic vision. There are a number of ways to measure it, and the paper looks at one, GDP per capita, which is the main metric used by the OECD. And figure 14 on page 44 of your table papers ranks Northern Ireland local government districts by GDP per capita. And you can see there are only 2 of our LGDs. Belfast and Mid-Ulster rank above the Northern Ireland average. The department has produced a sub-regional plan, and the plan is target and balance in 4 areas: productivity, wages, employment and greenhouse gas emissions. And it's also identified a number of what it calls macro level issues that permeate into those areas. And these issues include things like infrastructure, age and population. They're listed in more detail on page 46 of the paper. Regional balance also now features a part of Invest in I's business plan, and they've factored in firm targets. And the Regional Balance Fund is being used to fund local economic partnerships which are being developed. So from a budgetary perspective, the question we raise in the paper is whether the department's budget allocation will be sufficient to drive its ambitions in this area, or whether policy choices may be needed to direct funding into certain areas. On innovation, it's a recognised driver of economic and productivity growth. The department notes that it's a key policy lever in driving all 4 of its economic priorities. One key measure of innovation is R&D expenditure, and that includes total expenditure and then expenditure by business, expenditure by higher education and expenditure by government. And if we look at figure 16 on page 54 of the papers, Northern Ireland, this ranks the 12 UK regions by those expenditure measures, and Northern Ireland ranks 12th out of 12 on 3 of the 4 measures. That's overall spend, higher education spend and government spend, and it ranks 11th on the other, business expenditure. When you adjust those for the size of population, you present them by per capita rather than overall spend, we perform a bit better, but we remain in the lower third of the rankings in all measures. So the department has identified 7 high-profile sectors and has produced sectoral plans for each of those. These sectors have been chosen in part because of their innovation capacity. In the past year, the department's also introduced a range of innovation initiatives, including those for entrepreneurs, for SMEs, clustering and sector-specific issues, and full details are on pages 59 to 62 of the papers. Additionally, in September 2024, a report by the Ulster University EPC found that support measures in Northern Ireland were generally directed towards basic and applied levels of research, but there was less funding available for things like the commercialisation of R&D. So again, from a budgetary perspective, the question we raised in the paper is, will the allocation to the department allow it to make improvements to Northern Ireland's ranking in the R&D performance? Will it allow it to support the 7 high potential sectors identified, and will it also allow it to address any funding gaps? So moving on to tourism, the recently published Tourism Action Plan central target is to increase tourism expenditure to 3.5 billion by 2035. For context, expenditure was 1.2 billion in 2023, so that's a significant increase. The strategy is aligned with and includes actions across the 4 pillars of the department's economic vision, and full details are there on page 79 for your reference. The committee will also be aware of some of the challenges the industry faces, whether that be through the electronic travel authorisation, air connectivity, and competing with lower VAT rates in our neighbouring jurisdiction. So again, looking at the budget context of this, the paper asks whether the department's budget allocation will enable it to fulfil its tourism ambitions and to assist the industry with the issues that they face. So from my perspective, the paper also looked at energy. Just in the interest of time, I'm happy to take questions on that, but I'll move on to Michael at this point.
Maybe just pause there if you don't mind, sir, just in relation to tourism, innovation and subject this committee doesn't often talk about regional balance, just in case any member wants to ask any questions on any of those, first of all. Sinead.
Just clarification, obviously, on the regional balance and the example that you gave regarding GVA, obviously, and you have mentioned all the other measurements and metrics that there are in measuring regional balance. It's so complex. But disposable income, you didn't mention that in one of the areas that you would look at to kind of measure regional balance. Why would you not look at kind of disposable income?
You could. That was just to give
examples.
It's a multifaceted thing, and full analysis would require a multifaceted approach. But given the size and scope of this paper, it was far better just to go with the OECD's headline in this case.
Okay. Yeah, and I suppose when I've been looking into it and engaging with a lot of economists and in different forums. Deprivation is a kind of the lead indicator, and sometimes you can't see it with GVA because it doesn't narrow it right down into councils and other areas. So no, that's just interesting. The paper, honestly, it's a really good paper and was very valuable in some of the questions, and I'm sure we'll be using that paper. For in all our engagement with all of the evidence that we gather here. It's a really good base paper, and maybe we can come back and ask you more questions later on in some of the areas.
And Chair, if I may, the intention here is that, as I said at the start, very initial, and if there are further commissions, we're most happy to deliver on those. Thank you.
Could I just take your view just in relation on page 48, 50, sets out the allocation of the 15 million of the 45 million pounds for the local economic partnerships across the 11 district councils. I'm just keen, in terms of the research that you've done, do you have a particular view on the manner in which that funding has been split?
I don't really have a view. I don't think it really is for me to have a view and decide whether this is right or wrong.
Just thinking in the research that you've done.
I think it's interesting that they have begun to use things like place as a determinant, and productivity as a determinant of where money is going. That seems to be a new approach, and time will tell whether it's the effective and the right approach, but it is definitely an interesting development.
Yes. In terms of obviously having a limited budget to focus on the importance issue of regional balance, is the view that this is the best way to maximise those fundings and how they've been split?
Again,
you're not in the place to answer. No, fair enough. Okay, next.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'm going to briefly talk about skills shortages and higher education. So the members will be aware that the skills barometer has consistently shown an undersupply of qualifications in STEM related subjects. Now, STEM skills are important to the economy because they can provide a really important gateway to high value jobs in certain sectors that are usually associated with high levels of productivity. So they're really important to the economic growth. Now, in relation to future skills needs, there's been obviously a move towards a green economy and increased use of technology and AI. This will create an awful lot of new jobs in these areas, requiring new skills in the coming years. Also, there'll be a greater demand for green skills in the workforce and an increased risk of more skills gaps in these areas. Now, the skills barometer, which is published every 2 years, relies almost exclusively on formal qualifications to assess skills capabilities. Now, I know the most recent iteration has been published on Monday, and there is a section in it which talks about the issue of formal qualifications, but I think it bears repeating here that there is a significant limitation in using the skills barometer to assess skills in the future. If we rely too much on academic or formal qualifications, if you like, and don't consider job competencies or any experience. So I think it may be helpful for members or even the department to think of skills as in terms of distinct categories or clusters based on competencies required to do a job, separate from the formal qualifications that we have. Now, this would have a couple of beneficial impacts. It would also promote more in-work qualifications, micro qualifications, which would be really helpful for employees and employers. And would also improve the level of employer engagement with the skills delivery programs, which I think is something that would be vital, and that the previous speakers in the previous session certainly would have made mention of that. So another important point that was also mentioned earlier on was that the current formal qualification system, A-levels and degree courses, may not be flexible to keep up with the needs of jobs in the future. So this is why employer engagement is really, really crucial. So in relation to higher education, and the restriction of student numbers and the application of the Mazen cap, again, as members are aware, may have led to a situation where there's an oversupply of students here compared to the amount of student places that are available. And that can lead to a situation of a brain drain affecting our economy, and also creating further skills gaps in the future in certain areas. And I know the DFE are conducting a review of Mazen at the moment, and I'm sure the committee would be very interested to see and to be able to scrutinise that whenever that comes to publication. So I'm going to pass on now over to Nathan.
Thank you, Michael. I will now look at a number of other funding sources available to the Department for Economy. First, I will consider the UK Share Prosperity Fund. The fund launched in April 22 and had funding up to the period of March 2025. Subsequently, at the UK Government's 2024 autumn budget, this was extended for an additional year to provide for a transition to a new future funding model. The Northern Ireland allocation for 25-26 is around 45.5 million. It should be noted that the delivery of the fund in Northern Ireland is managed by the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, which engage with local stakeholders in Northern Ireland. The committee may wish to note Table 12 at page 85 in your pack, which presents a number of UK Share Prosperity initiatives in which DFE or Invest in I lead on. I'll now turn to the City and Growth deals. These are custom packages of funding between government and local authorities. Currently, there are 4 city deals in Northern Ireland. The paper notes that in September 2024, the United Kingdom government informed the executive that City and Growth deal funding had been paused. Soon after, the UK government confirmed that the 2 city deals, Belfast and Derry-Strabane, would continue. It wasn't until the autumn budget in October 24 that the Chancellor confirmed the 2 growth deals would continue. That was Causeway Coast and Glens and Mid-South West. I'd also note to the committee that at present all 4 deals have now signed their heads of terms. While the Department of Finance lead on City and Growth Deals Northern Ireland, DFE has accountability for approximately £800 million across 40 projects. And in the draft executive budget, DFE has been allocated 6.2 million in City and Growth Deal funding for 25-26. Finally, looking at the Shared Island Initiative and its accompanying Shared Island Fund, this was announced at the 2021 Irish Government budget. The fund had an initial €500 million in capital funding available from 21 to 25. Further to the election of the new Irish Government in January 2025, the new programme for government has committed a further $1 billion to the Shared Island Fund up to 2035. The fund is divided into shared initiatives with projects associated with each. Table 13 at page 88 of your pack provides an overview of those projects which are overseen by DFE or a departmental arm's length body, and these work in conjunction with a corresponding department in the Republic of Ireland. I'll just finish off there, and we're happy to take any questions on those two areas.
Thank you very much. Do members have any questions on any of those? Not at this stage? No? Okay. And then was there... I just want to say, firstly, I think we've done you a disservice in terms of putting you on at 12 o'clock with a 90-page report and not being able to go through all of that. This is really, really useful, and I'd be keen that we discuss with the committee about how we maybe engage on this, particularly with yourselves. I think this is the first time that anywhere that we've been able to put together all these different funding models right across Northern Ireland, be that from Shared Island, be that from City Deal, Shared Prosperity, and the implications of those. I think it'd also be useful that we share this with some of our other colleague committees, because I don't think that anywhere else has been all put together. So that's very, very useful to have. And I think at the end of this we'll probably schedule a follow-up so we can go through the entirety of your report if you're content with that. But honestly, it's a very, very good piece of work, so thank you so much on behalf of the committee for that.
That's appreciated.
No, thank you.
All the best.
Thank you so much. In terms of follow-up, members, if we could maybe even try in the next couple of weeks, if we as a committee just schedule some time for a bit of discussion amongst ourselves on this paper and how we want to take some of the aspects forward. It might be a couple of gaps, but if we just set aside even half an hour for a bit of an internal discussion amongst ourselves about how to take some of this stuff forward, because it has really, really good information, and no doubt they spent a huge amount of time investing. I just want to give them 20 minutes and then move on.
The scrutiny points where they've said the potential scrutiny points, I mean, they're great summaries for us and guidance for us. I mean, I found it fascinating.
Yes, no.
I would nearly want more.
Yes, no, exactly.
Just to interrogate the data a wee bit further, but you know, there's a lot there that we can take as learning. Every day's a school day.
Chair, just on that, obviously it's a huge piece of work, but a lot of the questions that I have are not for them, they're for the department. So that obviously feeds into the work, so it's no reflection on, we've no questions for them. I think the fact that there's a huge amount of information that will be useful for us going forward to navigate some of the questions that we have for the department. So,
I was just going to say the same. I think it's a really good reference document. I've just asked my researcher to print it off so that we can have it for every committee meeting just to refer to. I think it's really good.
How are we going to use this now to respond from the committee to the budget as well? Because it's kind of leading us to the direction is that some of the areas of spend in the budget are not totally reflected in the prioritisation of it, and even if some of the areas of spend maybe there's not enough money, or it just doesn't seem to be that there's a golden thread going through it, that it connects it to the budget and the government priorities as well, and departmental priorities. So how do we reflect all of that going forward for, well, next week when we're talking about budgets? And
Chair, yes, timing's going to be tricky here. I will get back onto the department and try and get responses to the questions we asked last week in order to inform the Chair's contribution to the budget debate. But there's so that budget deals with 24-25.
Yeah.
That's what's happening next week and the week after. Then we'll have to respond to the Committee for Finance about 25-26. So I think that's where members are. They're obviously concerned about 24-25, but they're more concerned now about 25-26 how we're going to, the golden thread, etc., and all of that. So the answer would be get the response from the department. Set aside the time, as the chair has suggested, for a bit of a chat about that. Maybe share this report with the department and ask them for their commentary on it as well. And then we have a little bit of time. Then maybe we could possibly summon the department again, but it would be policy officials, I think, maybe this time. I'm not sure who would summon. We'll think about that. So I'll schedule in time next week when hopefully we will have a response from the department, and then members can decide the way forward. So we still have time on 25-26. Okay.
When do we expect the first or the 25-26 budget debate in the Assembly?
I think the Committee for Finance they'll put it down. I would have thought they'll do it before the end of March. But then we're going to have the Minister will be with us on the 9th of April, as members are aware, so she can then maybe clarify on a number of matters anyway. But before that, before it's all done and dusted, I think you'll want answers from the department. Sounds like maybe another evidence session, but you can make up your minds next week, I think. We'll try and do it. Is that okay?
Members content with that? Okay, no problem. Okay, item 9 then, delegated legislation, companies disqualification. Refer to members of 310 at their tax. The department has laid a statutory rule, SR 2514, the companies disqualifications orders amendment regulation, Northern Ireland 2025. This rule is subject to negative resolution procedure. The department advises that under the Westminster Finance Act 2024, revenue and custom officers can apply to the courts for the disqualification of persons who are or have been directors of companies that have been carrying on businesses as promoters of tax avoidance schemes. Disqualifications can be brought by order made by the High Court or by an undertaking given by the Officer of Revenue and Customs. The forms used by the Clerk of the Court advise the Department, etc., of disqualification orders undertakens as prescribed in legislation. The regulations will replace those forms with substitutes which can be used where the disqualifications have been made under the Westminster Finance Act 2024. The committee considered the draft rule in January and had no objections. It is understood that the lead rule does not deviate from the proposed original. Are members have any questions on this? If not, then can we put to the meeting that the Committee for the Economy has considered SR 2514, the company's disqualifications order amendment regulations, Northern Ireland 2025, and subject to the report of the ESR has no objection to the rule. Are members content? Content. Okay, item 10 then. Yes, Peter.
Sorry, Chairperson. This is at page 333, my covering note. Look, there's a small drafting problem with this one. I'll just have a little chat with the department and I'll put it back into the pack next week. It's what should happen is the SL1, which is the policy document that you consider, that should match the SL5, which is the statutory rule itself, and it doesn't. So it's dead simple. We'll just get the department to reissue the SL1. They've agreed to do that and they're going to do it, but I don't have it yet. So if members are happy, Chairperson will just defer consideration of this devil and I'll put it back in the pack next week. And there's no harm done in this. It's negative resolution, so it'll happen on whatever date it's going to happen, and this will not stop it happening.
Okay.
Members content?
Okay.
Okay, item 11 then, members, is correspondence. There's an index at page... Did I miss something?
No, do you want to note it all?
Yeah, I have a correspondence at index at page 342. Members content to dispose of them as suggested within the index? Okay, perfect. That brings us on to the forward work plan at item 12. Peter.
Members, just a quick one. Tuesday, 18th of February, that's the second stage of the budget bill. So the budget bill and the debates the day before on the Monday, that all deals with 24-25. So the chair will likely make a contribution in that second stage of the budget bill, just talking about what we've learned about the monitoring rounds and all that good stuff. So that's what that's about. And then, as I said, later in March, I'm anticipating your colleagues in the Committee for Finance will put down a motion on the 25-26 budget. So you're not talking about that when you're in plenary next week. You're not talking about 25-26. You're talking about 24-25. Just to avoid you being corrected by the Speaker. Just in terms of our forward work programme, look, members, just to be aware, we're going off to Maze Long Cash on the 12th of March. There's a charge. It's 300 quid to go there, and there's also anyway, so just to be aware of that. It's not unheard of for us to be charged for things, Sometimes people like the FE colleges will let us go for free, but I think you want to be there, you want to look around it. So just to be aware, there's a charge. Hope members are happy enough with that.
Didn't happen in Belfast.
well, no, I think it might. I think, Chairperson,
And
if I've understood
Who's charging us?
it would be, I think it's Icon, isn't it?
Icon,
The Icon Centre are actually charging us. Again, not unheard of. Usually I try and go on the cheap. So what I do is I will find places where they're not going to charge us, and that's generally what I do. But Maison Cash, you want to be there. It'd be handier to be there, have our meeting there, and then they can show you around.
The TEO obviously are in charge of that entire site, so they're charging us to go and help support them to deliver economic development. And right, okay, very innovative.
There you go. It's economic development. Yes, indeed. Members, if I've also understood correctly,
Get a day like in Valley now. Come on.
the committee talked about Fibrus and speaking to them about the outcome of Storm Eowyn. And my understanding is that parties have all spoken to Fibrus now. And is it the case then that perhaps you don't want to schedule?
I don't think it's necessary.
Is that agreed? Okay, jolly good.
Sorry,
go on then.
Apologies, can I go in there?
Of course.
Sorry, and I'm catching up here, so I've missed, maybe you've had a conversation about this. I know in our constituency particularly, I still have customers that don't have a connection, and I had thought we would be meeting with them, and I don't want to now upset the apple cart if everybody else is content enough, but I do think there might be value there. Sorry.
No, not at all. I'm not. So I think Philip held a meeting with Fibrus, a couple of Fridays ago. The only thing was that I imagine we're going to schedule them in about 2 or 3 weeks, so we can do that if you're content. But if you want us to, I can follow up with some of the managerial contacts which you may already have, just about individual constituency ones, rather than the committee as having a hearing. But I'm happy if you think it's useful to do it, we can do it.
Sorry, and this is me kind of being awkward. It's just, we did do a meeting with them at a party level and obviously have the contacts with Julian and others, but I'm finding it fairly fruitless in terms of getting resolution for constituents, and I had hoped then the committee might have a wee bit more weight in having a meeting with them. So I appreciate that maybe others don't have those same battles, and if that's the case,
it's a valid point to raise, so we'll keep it on the agenda and do it, no problem.
Okay. Brilliant, thank you
No,
very much.
that's agreed, members. Right.
Okay.
And look, I think that's basically that. Just again, all right, to explain, our plan is to go to Dungannon. I think it's sometime in May, to go to the Granville Eco Centre. That's okay, so we'll do that. And then our other plan is to go to Fermanagh, to Enniskillen, probably after the summer. We would go to the FE College, brand new building. We would visit Balcas. But also, I think members, as you can see in correspondence, there's an invitation from INSERC, which is in Derry Lynn. So we could do all that in the one day, if members are content. Sorry, Chair.
Chair, I was at INSERC there about a couple of weeks ago, and it's a fascinating factory, and it would be well worth a visit for the committee.
We could get that all done in a day, members, if that's agreed.
And Balcas, they're all quite nearby as well.
Okay.
And then the only just one I wanted to raise was whenever we're doing our Causeway visit, I just think given the budget allocation for next year and also the importance of the tourism sector, I think it'll be important that we engage with in and around the organisers for the the golf, just so that we can be engaged in that. It's a vital thing for the tourism sector, if members are content with that.
Sorry, and further to the visit to Causeway, which I forgot, when we're going to Coleraine, we're going to their FE Centre. They've asked for members to stay for lunch. They're catering students, and apparently they're supposed to be very good. They're supposed to be very good now. So lunch is included, and they're not charging us. So there you go.
The people who need
I'll pay them in tier.
There you go. Sorry, Chair.
And then obviously we have scheduled a number of visits to some members' constituencies that are interested. So if there's anything in the coming weeks that you want us to start to put together a programme for Mid Ulster, obviously we'll do that too. So if you want to just give some thought to that and feed in, we'll get that arranged too.
Appreciate that, Chair.
Yep.
Will do.
Okay. Is there any other business, members? If not, we'll see everyone next week.
Thank you.
Okay, 10 a.m. and the meeting is now adjourned.
Committee Room 30, sound. 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 Committee Room 30, sound.